So welcome to CIS 118, Web Development and Design Foundations. Last time we went over how to set up a table using HTML, and better yet, how to set up tables using CSS. It was a pretty short chapter. There's not a lot of homework, and the running case study for this week only requires that you modify your style sheet and the yurts page, which is part of the Pacific Trails project. So there are only 2 files that you need to upload this week for the running case, and we'll go over those modifications here shortly. So homework for this chapter. We gave you the review questions, which is standard for the week, the apply your knowledge, and then hands-on exercises 1 through 5. So apply your knowledge where it says draw and write a brief description. I don't expect you to draw, to use some type of sketching program to submit these electronically, since the majority of my students in this course are either at-home students or they're 100% online listening or watching these videos after the fact. So I just expect you to describe it. So this is where you get to be the browser. You get to look at that HTML and then tell me what it's going to look like. But, and if, by the way, if that is not easy for you to do, then you can just cut and paste that code, that HTML and CSS into the browser or into Dreamweaver and actually see what it looks like. But you should be able to look at that and see quite clearly that there is a table tag there, open and closing table tag. And inside the table, we've got 1, 2, 3 rows. So this is a 3-row table that also has 1, 2, 3 columns. And the TH, or the table heading element, which applies to a particular cell, causes the text that's provided there to be bolded. And then the TD, or the table data or cell information, is just plain text. So it's a 3-by-3 table, and the first row is going to have in it the column headers, year, school, and major. And in addition to the TH tag causing that text to be bolded, it will also center it within the span of the column. So that's what we have there, is we have a 3-by-3 table, but the first row is just the headings, year, school, and major, and then that information below it. What about number 2, fill in the missing code? Again, there's not a lot to provide here. I don't want you to retype the code. I just want you to tell me what's missing. And it says that this table should have a background color of hex code, all C's, and a border. So it says some of the CSS properties and values are missing. So this is where we style our table with CSS. We have to put it in the style tags that are up in the header. So this is what type of CSS? This is embedded, right? This is embedded. We don't link to an external sheet, and it's not inline. Inline CSS appears with the elements in the body of the web page. So this is embedded, so it goes inside of a pair of style tags. Our selector is table, and that means whatever goes in the curly braces in terms of property value pairs applies to that selector, the table. What's missing? The keyword background color, that's got a dash in it, a colon, and then the pound, all C's, with a terminating semicolon. And then if I want a border, the property is border, colon, and then you follow that with the type, the thickness, and the color. So it would be 1 pixel, 1 px, space, solid, space, pound, all zeros, hex code 6 zeros would give you black. Also terminate that with a semicolon. So that's what's missing there. What about number 3, find the error? It says, why doesn't this table information display in the order that it was coded? Well, let's take a look at it. So I've got my, close my header, I've got my body, I've got a heading, I've got my table tag, I'm using the caption, that's fine. I've got a table row that I've got the table header elements, and then I've got, whoops, in my second row, it shouldn't say it shouldn't say table row again, right? That should actually be a TD or a table data or a cell tag in front of Mike's circle. So that's the problem with that one. Okay, what about hands-on? I give you hands-on 1 through 5. So it says, number 1, write the HTML for a 2-column table that contains the names of your friends and their birthdays. The first row of the table should span 2 columns and contain the following heading: birthday list. Include at least 2 people in your table. Okay, so a minor miracle has occurred, and I actually now have Dreamweaver installed on my Podium computer in the classroom. Now, all of you have had access to Dreamweaver since pretty much the 3rd week of the semester, right? And it's licensed to the email address that you had on file with the college. So several of you have already accepted the invitation to that, and then your login is the email that received the invitation to authorize the code. So that's an awful easy way to check your HTML. Right now I'm in code view, and if I create a new file, I'm just going to get the bare bones here created by Dreamweaver. So up in, and I can leave that alone. There's nothing interesting that needs to go up in there. And down here in my body is where I'm going to provide my table tag. So indent table, and you'll notice that Dreamweaver will follow along and correct my misspellings, or at least suggest corrections. So it's really a much better tool than Notepad++. Okay, so I'm indenting to make it readable. So I've got a table, and I'm going to have how many rows? 3 rows, right? So table row, and then I'm going to close that, and then table row, and then I'm going to close that. In fact, it'd be even easier for me to come up here and use Dreamweaver and just insert a 3x3 table. But I don't want to cheat. You can cheat though, that's okay. So open, close it, open, close it, open, and close it. Okay. And you can also go to the trouble of setting up your own tab stops if you'd like to do that. Okay, so what do I have? I've got the bare bones of a table that is 3 rows. And now let's go back and revisit that question. It said that it wanted a border. So that means as one of the attributes in my table tag, I have to use the word border equal and then put it in quotes 1. So that takes care of a table border. And then in my 3 rows, my first row is going to be a table heading element, right? So that means it'll be bolded and centered. So I open it with the table header, and what did we call this? This is the birthday list. And then we close it. And this has to span how many columns? 2. So where do I put my call span? On the table header. So the call span equal, and it's got everything numeric here has got to be in double quotes. So that will give me a heading that cuts across both columns. And that's all I have to do for that first row. And now I've got to have some elements. So TD, and then, I don't know, how about Mary? And then I close that. And then the next one would be the date, TD. Let's make up a date, 12/01. That's the birthday. Okay, and then close that. And I'm going to copy this. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to paste it. And here it's John. And birth date is, I don't know, April 15th, tax day. How about that? Okay, so what do I have? I've got in the body of my web page, I've got my table tags, and I've got a border around my table. And I have my first row span 2 columns, and then I've got 2 additional rows. However many columns, I have to have a corresponding TD or a table data item to define that column. So this is pretty crude. I mean, there's no CSS done here, and I haven't used any assistive technologies with the IDs and then the header reference, but it should do the job. So let's save this out. File, save as. I'm going to stick that on my desktop, and then this is 118, chapter 08, and this is hands-on exercise 1. Okay, so there it is. It's saved. Now, if I actually go to open that, what will it look like? There it is. Okay. So that does the job. Okay, so that was number 1. Back to Dreamweaver. Now it says write number 2. So I'm hands-on number 2, page 390 of the 8th edition. Write the HTML for a 3-column table to describe the courses you're taking this semester. The columns should be the course number, course name, and instructor name. The first row should use the table heading tags and contain descriptive headings for the columns. Use the table row groupings, tags, table header, and table body in your table. So this allows me to style the portions of my table differently. So I'm going to pick up where I left off here. I'm still going to have a border about my table, only now inside the table, I'm going to have a table head. Okay, so there's my table head. And then inside my table head, I'm going to have the heading area. So let me close my table head and back that up a bit. Okay. So inside my table header, now I'm going to have my table row. And inside the table row, so that still applies, but inside the table row, I'm going to have 3 different table heading elements, right? So the first one is going to be, what was it? Course number. And then I'm going to take this, just copy that, paste, paste. And then the next one is course name, correct? And then the third one was instructor. So this allows me to set up that headings row as a separate element in the table by defining that inside the table head. And now the table body is going to contain the remaining rows. So let me come down here and define my table body. Use that tag. And then these 2 rows, is it 2 rows? How many did it say I needed? 3-column table, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't say how many rows to define. So let's just do 2. If you want, we can do 3. Doesn't matter. So we're going to close the table body with a / table body. And let's back that out 2 tabs again to make this all readable. Table head, close, table body, good, good. And then the course number, CIS 118. And then the course name, web development and design foundations. Now what do we need here? We need a 3rd column, right? So we need a 3rd TD, and then this would be your instructor, right? That's me. And then close that. Okay, so what about the next one? Still going to need a 3rd column, right? So let's add that, and your instructor is still me. Okay, so this next course, CIS, if you're taking this one, the next one would be CIS 219, which is a whole course dedicated to client-side web design. And we call that client-side web design. Okay, so let's save this thing out, file, save as. Now we're going to call this one hands-on exercise number 2. I'm just saving these to my desktop. And now I can load that in the browser. So I go over to where I was, and if I load that in the browser, oops, got a little spill there. It looks like that. Okay, so that accomplishes exactly what we set out to do. Now, I've previewed these in the browser, but if you are using Dreamweaver as your integrated development environment, instead of being here in code view, I can go to live view, and that's what it looks like. I've got it split between my code and then the live view. So I don't actually have to load it in the browser. I can actually test it right here in Dreamweaver if I choose to do that. So if I get rid of the split, come up here. Okay, that's all code view, and that's all live view. Or I can just go to split view. So I can toggle back and forth between the two. Okay, so table, closing table, table head, close the head, table body. The reason that those are lit up in red is I was missing the closing angle bracket on my table body. I don't know if you noticed that the Dreamweaver IDE pointed that out, and now it's all happy again. Okay, it still managed to work properly in the browser, but again, if I want to just bypass going over to the browser to load it, I can just go to live view, and then I can see what it looks like. All right, or I can even go to split view. Okay. So that was hands-on number 2. What about number 3? It says, write the HTML for a table with 3 rows, 2 columns, and no border. The cell in the first column of each row will contain the name of one of your favorite movies. The corresponding cell in the second column of each row will now contain a description, and it says, configure alternating rows to use the background color of gray. Okay, so I could do this the hard way and set those. Well, number one, I want to use CSS. I'm not going to bother to do any of these table definitions using deprecated features that you don't want to use as a developer moving forward. But the tricky part here is if I'm going to alternate rows in gray, I could set up a rule and stick it in as an embedded CSS property up in the style section of the header of my web page, because I'm just going to put embedded styles here to make it easier for you. And I could define that rule, and then I could apply that rule inside every TR element. I could come in here and I could associate the particular style. Okay, I could put the rule that was in there, or the class, or the tag. Depends on whether I wanted to use it as a class definition or just set it up as a tag. So I could do it that way. But the easier way to go is to set up the pseudo class and then have it apply to that HTML. I'm sorry, have it apply to that particular element of the web page. So I can style those table elements using CSS and then those pseudo classes. So I think that's what we're going to do. So let me get into what it asked us to do. It says we need to have a table that is how big? 3 rows, 2 columns, and no border. Okay, so inside my body, and I can still leave this. Well, no, I want to get rid of the table header now. Maybe I don't. Yeah, I'll leave the table header. So what do we want? We want the movie name. That's what they're asking for here, right? 2 columns. The first one would be the name and the description. So movie name. And then the second column is movie description. So we'll leave that structure there. Okay, so that takes care in the header of my column names. And do I want a border? It said no border. So I flip my border to 0. That'll get rid of the border. And then I want to have, it says, a couple of rows here. And we're going to get rid of this third column. And then you have to have a movie name. So I don't know, you pick a movie name. What's a good example? I don't know. I don't have enough time to go to the movies, right? How about Star Wars, The Force Awakens? And then description. Bummer. I find out Han and Leia are divorced. What about the next one? How about Deadpool? Finally, a Marvel movie I enjoyed. Okay, it's immaterial, the content. The point is we want to have a 3x2 table and we want to have no border. But now, if we're going to style this thing such that it has alternating color in the rows, we're going to have to set up that pseudo class and stick it up in the header in a set of style tags. First, let me do this. File, save as, and we're going to call this one ho3.html. Okay. Now, if I go to preview this thing, well, okay. So there's my movie name and my movie description. So let's go now back to my code view. So you notice the columns were kind of funky there, right? But I did have my header, and I know why it's doing that. It's because I have my columns up in the header. So let's get rid of this actually. Let's get rid of the header. Let's get rid of that. And let's keep them together. Get rid of the table body. Close the table body. So now I just have my open and closing. Okay. So file, save that out. Let's go to live view. Okay. So it gives you just enough space. All right, so we'll go back to code view. How am I going to alternate the rows up here in my header? And before I close my header, right after the title. And what do we want to call this? Call this hands-on number 3. That'd be the title that's in your page when it opens. So we're going to have a set of style tags. And then close it. And inside the style tags is where we're going to put the rules that affect the table. So at minimum, what we're going to have to do is put in this style rule. So it's the selector table row and then a colon. And then this is right out of the table in your textbook. And this was covered on page 383 of the 8th edition of the book. So we're going to tell the browser to alternate colors in these rows. Okay, so let's save this. And then there it is. Okay, so they alternate. Notice though that there's a slight gap here between the columns. So if I want to get rid of that, or if I want to change that, I can modify that. So just for grins, I'm going to bring in a style rule for the whole table. So table, and then width, you can specify how big you want it. How about 600 pixels? And then margin, if I put auto, then it'll be centered on the page and the viewport. And if I put border spacing of 0, that should take care of the gap between the columns. Let's see if it does. So file, save, and then live. Well, at least it's centered on the page. Okay. And now it's easier to read. Let's go back to the code view, margin spacing. Okay. Border spacing is 0 for the table. For the table row, oh, you know what? That's a table, that's a cell. So let's add another rule. For the table header and the table data, border style, none. I think that'll take care of it. Let's see if it does. File, save. No, it wasn't the border style. Okay, so it's not border style. How about this? I know this will do it. He says confidently. How about padding of 0? Wow, that didn't do it either. All right, let me think about that. So the reason I'm focused here, and at least you know it's all home cooking, now I've set a table size, it's spread out, it's readable, and I have my pseudo class that's going to alternate coloring these lines or zebra stripe my table. What's bothering me here is this little gap in the line between the columns. Let's go back to the code view again. So border is 0, that works. Okay. And then I'm not using the caption, that's fine. I set the padding at 0, and then I set my margin at auto, and I set my border spacing at 0. Well, should have done it. Border style. Oops, look at that. Helps to type things properly. Border style and none. Let's try that again. Well, that didn't matter either. All right, well, I'll get back to the next time I see you. I don't want to drag the class down here because I can't get rid of that at the present time. But there's something I already specified a padding of 0, border style and none. If I put a border of 0, let's try that one. Okay. Nope. Okay. Well, I'll get back to you with that one. I got to get rid of that little break there, right? Okay, but otherwise it did exactly what we wanted it to do, right? For number 3, that was the table with the movies. What about number 4? Hands on number 4. So that one says, use the CSS. It says, use CSS to configure a table that has a border around both the entire table and the table cells. Write the HTML to create a table with 3 rows, 2 columns, cell in the first column each row, name your favorite movie. Okay, so this is exactly, number 4 is exactly the same as number 3, except we need to put a border around both the table and the cells inside it. So wasn't it smart that I ended up using CSS to answer number 3? So this is now hands-on number 4. And let's save this out. Save this out as number 4. So here we go, hands-on number 4. Now, what do I need to change here? I need to put a border, that's all. So where am I going to put it? Put it up here in the table properties in my CSS. So it would be property border. How big do I want it? Let's say 1 pixel. And then what type of border do I want? A solid. And then what color do I want? Pound 0000000. We'll make it black. Okay. Do I need to do anything else? Margin is still set to auto. That's going to center it left and right. Border spacing of 0. Let's get rid of that. No, I can still leave that. So that's the spacing about the border, but not the border itself. Okay, no, that works. And I can still leave it zebra striped, and I can still specify on my table heading and my table data or table cell. I do want to go back to border style. Border style, S-T-Y-L-E, of none. And then in terms of padding, give this one like 1.5 an EM. 5 EM. All right. And it's just subjective what you want to do here, but the trick is to put the border up here in the CSS property for your table. So let's save this out and let's see what it looks like. Well, I don't have, oh, that set the border about the table. Okay, so now we have to make sure we put the border about the cell elements. Okay, so let's go up here. Border spacing is 0, margin auto, width 600. I'm going to drop that down to 400 just because it's already big enough. That's my color. Okay, and then I also have to put a border about my cells, right? Forgot about that one because the instructions say to put a border about both the table and the cells. So underneath those descriptors then for the table heading and the table data, put the same property, save this out. Okay, now I'm sure it'll work, and there it is. Okay, and you can play with those things, right? You just create your CSS rule and then specify the table properties that you want to modify, put them either in a separate sheet, or you can embed them up here in the header. Okay. Now, again, we could have gone to the trouble of defining classes or tags and then reference those classes or tags down here on specific rows. But if we had done that and then we changed the content or restructure the table, then we'd have to jerk around with remembering where we put those references to the style rule. Better to just use the pseudo class to get that done. So that was number 4. And then the last one, number 5, it says modify the table you created in number 1 to be centered on the page. Use a background color of CCCC99 and display text in Arial or the browser. Sans serif font. Configure this table using CSS instead of HTML. And then it says to put an email link to yourself on the web page and save it as mytable.html. So with regards to what you turn in, you do not have to turn in that mytable.html. You can simply provide this HTML as an answer in a Word document, or just throw it all into one HTML file if you prefer to do that. Actually, I'd rather you just stick it in a Word document, okay? But let's go back to that. So this was hands-on number 1. And what do we need to do here? We need to come up into the header area. And then this is hands-on number 1, HOE number 1. And it said to use CSS. So that means we have to add a style tag up here in the head to embed it. And then let's close that. And then this is where we actually specify how to get that to work. So I'm not going to reinvent the wheel. Let's come over here. I've already got it floating, don't I? So let's just cut and paste the CSS that I used for number 4, or copy and paste rather. Let's go back to number 1. See, I was already ahead of myself anyway. So there's my table rule. And what's that going to do for me? That's going to create a solid border. It's going to set, let's go back, let's make it 500 this time. 500 width. If I put margin of auto, it will automatically center it in the viewport. That means the size of the window set up by the browser when it's open to resize by the user. Okay, and it says to use a background color, so we're going to have to add that. So background color, I'll put that right down here. If I could type. Background color of what? Pound CCCC99. Okay. What else did it ask me to do? Display text in Arial or the browser default. And that's it. Okay, so here's where I have to use my font family, right? So it's going to have font family, Arial, or any sans serif, right? Okay, I think that does it. So let's save this one out as hands-on exercise 5, because there's a modification of 1. I don't want it right over 1. And what's it look like? Well, there you go. So it's centered in the page. And it's got the right background color. And I did it using CSS. Okay, so that's all of the hands-on exercises. So what do I owe you here? I got to figure out why those cells using that that format across the page. For the pseudo class, for the row, remember there was a gap there between the columns. It didn't go all the way across the page. I'm not sure why that occurred, but I will reference that the next time I see you, okay? All right, so what's left to do? The case study. So let me get rid of that, and let me get rid of these other files. So the case study, again, the modification this week is quite trivial. You only have to modify the Pacific Trails style sheet, and then embed the table into the yurts page. Okay, so let's do that. So here I'm in chapter 8, end of chapter 8, and I'm in the case study for the Pacific Trails Resort on page 394 of the 8th edition. And it says to pick up with chapter 6 if you skip chapter 7. We didn't skip chapter 7, so make sure you roll over 7 to 8. And by the way, I'm making the solution for 7 open at the end of the week, so you can pick up with that if you have a hole to dig out of for 8, but 8's due here pretty soon. So it says to configure your CSS, modify the external sheet, configure a table, code a new style rule for the table elements selector that configures a centered table with a 1 pixel blue border in a 90% width. Also configure the borders in the table to collapse. Hey, just for grins. Let me go to my desktop. And let's try this. Okay. Actually, I put that in the wrong file. Copy that. I wanted to go back and see if I could solve that little gap between the columns like right now, because it's bothering me. And I have an obsessive compulsive nature, so no, we didn't even style that one with, it wasn't number 1. Which one was it? Which one did the alternating rows? Was it number 3? I guess it was number 3, correct? Let's go to number 3. That was the one. Okay. Okay, and then there it was. Okay, so now I don't have to get back to you next time. You have to use the border collapse feature to get rid of the gap between those two columns when you want your zebra striping to be consistent. Okay, so that was gnawing away at me. I know you're just as relieved as I am as knowing what feature you have to put in there to get rid of that. So back to our CSS page for our Pacific Trails case study, and now this is chapter 8. This is our chapter 8 solution, not our chapter 6 solution. So it says to come in here and do what? Set up a CSS set of properties for the table. For the table itself, for the table cells, define a new ID. Oh, I'm sorry, it says center the TD content. Okay, yeah, there it is. So configure the text class, so we're defining a new class. And then use the pseudo class to alternate colors in the table. Okay, so first let's figure out we're going to insert this in the table. How about above our media queries from last time? So here was the first media query. So let's insert our new CSS rule for the table and table elements here. And the first selector is table. And then the next one we have to define is for the table data and the table header, in other words, the cells. We're going to have to specify some format for the cells. And then we're going to just center the data for the cells. And again, these are top down. So if there was a replication of property, it would be the one at nearest the bottom of the document that the browser would pay attention to. So we're going to have to do that for the centering of the items in the table. And then we're going to have to define our new rule, right? This is our text class. And then we're going to use this pseudo class for the table of rows, and it's nth of type. And then put even in there. So that's my selector. And then some set of rules. Okay, so these are my new style elements for my table. So now that I've got them in the file based on the selector or the structural element, now let's take a look at what it says. So it says define the table with the width of 90% and then automatically centered on the page with a border that color, and then get rid of the margins. So I'm looking at task 2, items 1, I guess just item 1. Okay, so what do we have? It's going to be a width of 90%, and then it's going to have to automatically center it in the viewport margin of auto, and then the border on it is going to be 1 pixel solid, and the number they told me to use was hex 3399cc. And then border collapse the border collapse. And notice Dreamweaver automatically will finish these along with the properties that are allowable for that particular, I'm sorry, along with the values that are allowable for that particular property. All right, so that takes care of table. Good. So now what about item number 2 on task 1? It's again page 395, the 8th edition. It says configure table cells, code a new style rule for the TD and TH element selectors, which I already have defined here, that configure 5 pixels of padding and a 1 pixel blue border. So the padding would just be the property padding, and then it said 5 pixels, 5px, and then the next one is the border. So the border on this one is going to be 1 pixel solid and also the same color, hex 3399cc. And notice it'll even show me the color So is that all it has asked me to do for the table cell items? And TD is table data, it's still the cell. Table header is a cell, but it's a cell that's got the text in it that's bolded and centered. Okay, so then it says in item number 3 on task 2, it says to center the TD content. So all I have to do there is, and I already have it defined for my table data item, I want that centered. So that's text alignment. So the property is text align, if I could type. And then notice Dreamweaver allows me to get the center value. Okay, so text align of center, is that all I have to do? It is. That's all I have to do for that one. Now I'm defining a class. So I'm on item number 4. It says configure the text class, so it has to start with a dot, which I've already done. And then it says, notice that the content in the table data cells that contain the text description is not centered. Code a new style rule for a class named text that will override the cell style, the TD style rule, and left align the text using text align left. So in this case, it's just going to override that. So it would be text align, A-L-I-G-N, colon, left. That's it. That's all that's going to do. That's my rule to override the default. And then finally, my nth of type, it says to change the background color to use hex F5 FAFC. That's it. So I've already got that rule here. I just haven't specified what property value pairs. So it's going to be background color, right? And that code was F5 FAFC. So there's the color. Okay, that's it. That's all I had to do for my CSS. So save that out. And by the way, I've already loaded the pages into Dreamweaver here. So if you forgot what it looked like after we finished the last time, if I go into live view, there it is. So click on my home page, click on my yurts page, click on my activities page. Whoop, it's not. Okay. So I go into live view. There we go. So there's my home page. Take out a split. Just go to live. Home page, activities page, yurts page, and go to live view. So what we're going to add here is a table to the bottom of this page. That's what's left. That's the other task to use. And this is on page 395 again. So it's task number 3, modify the yurts page. So now I have to open up the HTML file here, which I'm in, go to my code view. And then it says configure a heading 3 element with the following text, yurt packages, and then below that, create a paragraph of text, and then put in the table that you see near the bottom of the page. That's it. That's all we have to do for this particular file, and then that's all we have to do to wrap up this chapter's case study. So, just a lot of typing, really. So let's add it underneath the, before we get to the end of the main. Right after our definition list, right here. We're going to add it to the bottom of the page, right before we get to the end of the main. So what do we have to add? A heading 3. So H3, and then it's yurt packages, correct? Yurt packages, and then close that. Heading 3. Okay, and then we need a paragraph text. So I could just go into design view here in Dreamweaver and just insert a paragraph and type away, but I want you guys to be familiar with the HTML and CSS. So here in the paragraph, and I'm just going to type it literally as it appears in the textbook on page 395. A variety luxury yurt, if I could type, packages are available. Choose a package below and contact us to begin your reservation. And I can just skip a line here because tabs don't matter. We're happy to build a custom package just for you, exclamation point, end of paragraph. Okay, so that took care of the paragraph in front of the table. So I need to have a table tag. And I'm going to have to close my table. So I put that now so I don't forget later. Okay. And then inside the table, if you see the table that's down there, I don't know, do I want a border on it? It says, so I am on now item 3, task 3. You're ready to configure the table. Code a table below the paragraph with 4 rows, 4 columns. Use the table, table header, table data elements. Assign the TD elements that contain the details and descriptions to the class name text. So that's the rule that we use to override what was on the page. So this is going to be left justification. And the content for the table is as follows. Save your page, test it in the browser, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so I'm going to put a border on it. Border equal 1. And then inside the table, I'm going to have 4 rows and 4 columns, right? So TR, and then I'm going to close it. And then inside the table row, I'm going to have a table. Our first row is going to be all table headings, right? Column headers. TH is for the cell. It stands for table heading, but it's really column headings, right? So I'm going to have that. I'm going to close it. So let's do that right now. And I'm going to have 4 of these, right? So I'm going to copy that and paste, paste, paste. Okay. So there's my first row. And I'm going to have how many rows? 4. So I'm going to copy that, paste, paste, paste. So now I have my table. My first row is all headings. Actually, I jumped the gun there. They should not be table headings. They should be table datas. Table data, table data, table data. Only the first row has the table headings. So I'm going to grab these and I'm going to replace these. There we go. Okay. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 rows, and I've got 4 columns in each row, but the first row are table headings. So what goes in the first row? Package name, description, nights, and cost per person. I'm looking right at the table there on page 395. So it's going to be package name, then description, and then nights, and then cost per person, right? Okay, so that takes for my first row. Then what goes in the cells? Whatever the contents of that table are. So the first one would be weekend escape. And then the next one is Zen retreat. And then the third one is kayak away. Okay, so second row, second column, it's going to be 2 breakfasts, a trail map, a picnic snack. That's what comes with it, right? I'm reading it out of the table. And then in terms of the nights, it's 2 nights. And in terms of the cost per person, it's going to be $450, right? That's what's listed there. Now, before I get carried away, these are all supposed to be what? They're supposed to be left justified, right? I want them left justified in that cell. So I have to come in here and before I get to the descriptions, inside the TD element or the table data element, I have to refer to that class that I defined in my CSS. So class equal, and then I have to put this in quotes. Text, right? Isn't that what I called it? Dot text. So I preface it with class equal text because I defined that rule dot text. Did I not? Let's go look. Yeah, there it is, right? Okay. So now I'm back. What about the next one? Zen Retreat. Also, I have to put here class equal text. And then what do I put as my description for this one? 4 breakfasts, a trail map, and a pass for daily yoga. Okay. How many nights? 4. And then what's the cost per person on this one? This one was $600 a night, right? Okay, we're almost done. We've just got one more to do. So this one was kayak away. And again, for my description, I have to refer to that class that I defined that's going to left justify, override the default of centering it. And then you can see why we just want to left justify the contents of the description. It's okay if nights and cost per person are centered in that column. So this one is what? This one is 2 breakfasts, 2 hours of kayak rental daily, and a trail map. Okay. And then 2 and 500. That's 500 per person. Okay. Oh, you know what I forgot to do? Back in the hands-on exercise for number 5, it just hit me because I just saw that we've got a mail to here in our running case. Number 5, it also said place an email link to yourself on the web page. So I forgot to do that. Hands-on number 5. Don't forget to do that. It's pretty easy to do. It's right here. This is how you put in your mail link. All right, you put mail to, a colon, and then whatever mail address. Understand that isn't actually displayed by the browser. You still have to put whatever your email address would be so the user can visually see that. But if you actually want to put a mail link, a hyperlink, you have to define a hyperlink and put your mail to in there. So you would stick that as the contents of the cell, or maybe in the right underneath the cell. In terms of the table footer, if you wanted to use the table head, body, and footer structure, you could put this mail to reference in your table footer. All right, but that takes care of this guy. So file, save. Now, do we want to save our changes? We do. And then, I don't know what happened to my project, but let's go and open Yurts. And there it is. Okay, so that was it. That's all we had to do today, is to add this table. So we put this as a heading 3, and we put this paragraph of text, and we did this 4x4 table. And notice that it is alternating shades of blue. It's really faint in terms of the screen that I'm looking at, so maybe you can see it a little better. But that's, I just entered the values they told me to enter there. and it looks an awful lot like figure 8.15 on page 394. That's what we're supposed to accomplish with our yurts HTML file this week. Okay, so that's it. What are you going to upload for me for homework for the exercises in a Word document? All of the answers to the review questions, the apply your knowledge, the hands-on exercises 1 through 5. You do not have to give me a separate HTML file for hands-on exercise number 5. I know it asked you to submit a separate HTML. You don't have to do that. So that's one assignment. And the other assignment for the week is the running case. Again, we just did that together, and there's only 2 files to upload there. That would be pacific.css and then your HTML file for yurts. Okay. All right, so that's it. That's a wrap on Chapter 8 for the week. Next time I see you, we'll get into some interesting capabilities you can add to your web page in terms of forms and the data validation structures that are built right into those features of a form. And the form is designed for collecting information, sending it off to a server at the other end of the computer you're attached to. So that's what we'll cover next time. Please come, having read Chapter 9, so we can have a reasonable discussion together. Okay? All right, so thanks very much. Have a wonderful week.